Introducing the Academic Collocation List. So in this video, we're going to zoom in on the Academic Collocation List, which is different from the Academic Word List from the previous video. Like I mentioned in the previous video, the Academic Word List was developed by Cogshead in the year 2000. So this was a list that focused on individual words. Well, ever since, there's been much more interest in the co-occurrence of more than one word, so in chunks of language, if you will. So the objective of this video is specifically, on the one hand, to make sure that you have everything you need to be able to start learning better vocabulary that is useful for you to set you up for success. And on the other hand, seeing as to how I train a lot of bachelor's, master's, and PhD students in using English more effectively in their domain or discipline, if you will, I'm going to explain a little bit about the background of this study so that you can understand how this list came to be and how to use it. So let's start by exploring what collocations are. Seeing as to how language use is a vehicle for communication and words have specific meanings, let's just first consult a good dictionary. So when we look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary, we see that the dictionary definition is that it's the use of certain words together or a particular combination of words. And this is exactly what a collocation is, which is a chunk of language that often occurs together in a specific context or text. When we zoom in on what type of information is provided by Merriam-Webster, we see on the one hand, of course, the definition of a word, but we also see that a collocation is defined as a noun, and a noun is a part of speech, which is also a building block of sentences and utterances. Note that I've created two support series here on YouTube. The first one is about how to use dictionaries effectively, and the other one is about parts of speech. So find a card on the top right of the page. So back to the Academic Collocation List. Well, you might wonder at this point, why is it relevant for me to be confronted with a list and why should I care about that? Well, the thing is that it's more difficult to recognize collocations in texts as language learners, and especially if it's not your native tongue. So what research has done for you is to really identify which chunks you should actually know to be able to boost your output. So in addition, you should also be able to recognize chunks in texts easier. So there's another added value. Well, the thing is that it's more difficult to recognize these on your own. So learning these chunks would be a great way to start recognizing and producing better academic language. So being confronted with a list of words is not necessarily enough. So you need to do a lot more than that, which I'm going to cover during this series. But to introduce this properly, research in computational linguistics has shown that it's more difficult to acquire collocations because there's less predictability. So it's easier to acquire grammatical chunks and idioms, which are also known as formulaic expressions, due to the level of predictability. So why is it relevant to learn more about chunks? Well, the upside is that collocations can be instantly recognized by native speakers, and that down the line it's easier to be familiar with a lot of chunks because then it's easier to produce longer stretches of language output. However, it does remain a little bit difficult for learners in general to acquire and use them properly. So in the language services, training services, and workshops that I provide clients with, I pay a lot of attention to how to acquire these types of collocations or lexical units, if you will, in a general sense. So note that that is not necessarily something you can learn through osmosis and by watching a video passively, right? So you actually need to process language actively to be able to store it in your long-term memory and whatnot. So if you're interested in that, you can contact me, but let's just move on to the actual study. So work was published in the year 2013 in a journal of English for Academic Purposes titled Developing the Academic Collocation List, a Corpus-Driven and Expert-Judged Approach by Ackerman and Chen. So by gaining a little bit more insight into how this list came to be, you'll be able to understand this is not just a random list that is presented to you and that you should process because someone tells you to do that, but because these patterns are actually observed in a field that is focused on that specifically. So computational linguistics is involved with analyzing patterns in large bodies of texts And in this specific study, expert judges were also involved. If you're interested in reading the abstract of this paper, then pause the video here. So to me, all of this stuff is just fascinating, but I can imagine that that might not be the case for you. So let's just focus on the most important information, and let's start with background. So in this study, the Pearson International Corpus of Academic English was used. A corpus is a large body of texts, in this case academic texts, that contains over 25 million words. So remember the academic word list that was published in the year 2000 by Coxhead? Well, afterwards, studies really focused more on the co-occurrence of chunks of language, like I mentioned earlier. So we're talking about studies in the year 2001, 2004, and 2008. For example, the study by Highland. All right, so please note that the chunks that I discussed, so collocations, can be divided into 3 categories, roughly speaking. First of which is grammatical chunks, so for example, phrasal verbs. The second category is formulaic expressions, or idioms, if you will, which are also sometimes called dead metaphors. And then we've got the last category, which is lexical chunks, and that is specifically the type of languages included in this list. So let's zoom in on the method of this study. So the following fields of study are represented in the corpus, which are, first of all, the applied sciences and professions, which accounts for 31%, humanities, which accounts for 21%, social sciences, 25%, and a natural or formal sciences, 23%. So in this study, the quantitative analysis was used, so the computational analysis, and that was followed by the qualitative refinement, so done by expert judges. And more specifically, this entire process involved 4 stages. So the first one is the computational analysis, second one, refinement of the data-driven list based on the quantitative and qualitative parameters, the third one is the expert review, and the fourth one is the systematization. So the following experts were included in this study. First of all, the professor of linguistics, professor of English linguistics, senior lecturer in EFL and TESOL, a dictionary consultant, professor of English language and literature, a lexicographer and publisher. Let's discuss the results. This study generated a list containing 2,468 entries. So that is a document, a list of 42 pages to be exact. So they presented a list containing the 2,468 most frequently used words and pedagogically relevant entries. So note that that was determined by corpus analysis and determined by expert judgment. Alright, now that we've explored the ins and outs of the study, let's zoom in on what's next. Moving on to the conclusion. So the main takeaway of this video is this. You should start familiarizing yourself with the Academic Collocation List to be able to obtain academic success. Let's start. Well, in this series, I'm going to take you through the entire thing. So I'm going to discuss the entire list and all the collocations that are included in that. So new videos on the Academic Collocation List will be published shortly. And in the meantime, if you'd like to learn more, take a course with us or let us develop a tailor-made training service for you. Well, that concludes our video, but we'd love to hear from you too. So please comment below and share your experiences. If this video was useful for you, please like it and subscribe to my channel.